Welcome to another Zoom meeting and podcast of Here's Tom with the Weather, where we investigate the plethora of higher powers that populate the vast universe of 12-step recovery, where alcoholics riff out on steps 3 and step 11 as prescribed by the founders of AA, who encourage us to find some kind of higher power as long as it's not us. We speak to people with all manners of higher powers, from those who are atheists, Sufis, agnostics, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, followers of Islam, Hermetics, paganists, non-duality. We leave no stone unturned. It's our aim to promote understanding and open-mindedness so that alcoholics and addicts can find a higher power of their own to stay sober and carry that message. We promote tolerance and empathy for folks who might just have a different spiritual practice than we do. It's all about live and let live. And just to remind everyone that this is not an AA meeting or an NA meeting. It's just an examination of some people's version of a higher power. Sometimes we talk to seekers, to gurus, and to people not necessarily in recovery. But today it's a special episode as we host a great debate between two wise old Buddhists on the merits of AA and alternative recovery programs. What works? What doesn't? What's hokum? Where does Buddhism and the 12 steps fit in with all of this? Let's find out. And here's our guests, Vince C. and Kevin G. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello, David.
How are you?
Good day. Good day.
Thanks for coming up. So, going to do a little bit of an intro now, a bit of a bio from both of you, so folks can get a little bit of an understanding of where you're both coming from. In the blue corner, Vince C. Having drunk alcoholically from the age of 14 until the age of 39, Vince sat in his kitchen and poured a glass of lager. He made a promise to himself that this would be his last drink ever. That was 24 years ago. Since then, he's been associated with Wat Tham-kra-bok, the famous detox monastery in Thailand and Buddhist-oriented drug and alcohol recovery. Vince founded and has facilitated the Fifth Precept Sangha meditation for awakening, sit and share meetings in England, Scotland, Ireland, India, Nepal, Thailand, and the USA as part of his ongoing teaching of Hungry Ghost Retreats. He's a charter member of the Buddhist Recovery Network and keynote speaker at Buddhist Recovery Summits. And now, in the red corner, Kevin. Kevin G is a Buddhist teacher and author of several books, including One Breath at a Time, Buddhism and the 12 Steps, and his latest, Buddhism and the 12 Steps, Daily Reflections. A longtime Buddhist practitioner and 12-step participant, he's a leader in the mindful recovery movement and one of the founders of the Buddhist Recovery Network. Kevin's a husband, father, and musician. His album, Laughing Buddha, is a collection of rock and world beat tunes with Buddhist themes. And we're going to put all these details, both of these gentlemen's details, in the chat. So if you want to make contact after here. So let's get started off. And I want to talk to Vince straight off. Vince got sober, but without the 12-step and has remained sober. Vince, can you tell us a little bit of your story before we go into Kevin?
Yeah, well, very basically, I started drinking from a very early age. Irish Catholic family, long lines of alcoholics on both sides of the family. Alcohol at home was the norm. So I probably started drinking at 13, but seriously at 14. At the age of 17, I knew I was an alcoholic. I filled in one of those quizzes. Do you have a problem with alcohol in a woman's magazine, and it's if you answer yes to 2 or 3 of these questions, you might have a problem with alcohol. I answered yes to nearly all of them, and I was 17, but I ignored that and just carried on for another many years. But having drunk alcoholically and getting, approaching my 40s, my world was starting to fall apart in small noticeable ways. And one, I tried controlled drinking, no good. But so one evening, it just hit me, my life was falling apart. The world around me was crumbling. So I just sat in my kitchen in Newbury in Berkshire in England, and I got a glass and I took a can of lager out of the fridge and poured that beer, knowing it was going to be my last. I just said, no, this is it. This is my last beer ever. And at the same time, I made a very conscious choice that I wouldn't switch addictions. I knew that I could quite easily, move on to onto dope and start smoking. But I consciously said no. I'm very frightened of life without alcohol. I couldn't imagine. At the time I thought anyone who didn't drink must be mad, absolutely mad. How could you possibly move through life without taking alcohol? But there I was, pouring this last glass of lager, sipping it, and knowing that would be my last drink ever. And as I say, that's 24 and a half years ago, nearly 25 years ago now. And I haven't drank, I haven't relapsed.
Okay.
Do you want me to explain a little bit about the monastery?
I just wanted to bring Kevin in there as well and just say, Kevin, your story is markedly different, and I guess what we're hearing there, and just for you two to sort of engage a little bit there, is he's not used the 12 steps to get sober or to remain sober. That's quite peculiar, isn't it?
Well, I don't want to call Vince peculiar. Odd, perhaps, but not peculiar. Vince is a dear friend, obviously. Hopefully that's clear. But no, it is interesting. I remember when I met Vince, and he was very kind to host me at his home in Newbury, where he no longer lives. And it did surprise me. And I did have, questions about how that could work, because his story goes against the orthodoxy of certainly of Alcoholics Anonymous. And, and I will say that when I started this work of kind of being a meditation teacher who tries to help people in recovery, I had I was around 20 years sober, maybe at that point, a little less. And, I had gotten sober and sort of believed in the AA orthodoxy, but because I'm kind of working with this population of people that are not necessarily following that orthodoxy, I've been exposed to a lot of different stories, and it's kind of blown up my beliefs and made me be a lot more open-minded, which doesn't quite suit your need for conflict here, and drama, but truth is more important than drama. So, but it is striking, and it's interesting because what we're forced to ask, the question we're forced to ask is, what does it take? And it is a perennial question. Clearly Bill Wilson and his gang, thought they had come up with the answer. And what I would say is they came up with an answer, one answer, but what it takes, what it takes is something else. Their process is a manifestation of what it takes, but then you have to go back deeper and ask that question of what it really takes to get and stay sober, to stay clean, to recover. And I think that's a really vital question to ask, and not an easy one to answer.
Vince, just on that then, so would you say that I know you mentioned that word that you made a decision. I think it's in our parlance, I think you said you were not so much struck sober, but you made a spiritual decision to get sober. Did you have what we would call a psychic change? What was that process? What was the strike of lightning that made you get sober? That gave you that cause, that gave you that drive? You have to unmute there, mate.
It was a confluence. It was lots of different things were coming together at the same time. Things like being a trade union representative. I'd represented, very close to the time I stopped drinking, certainly within 2 years, 18 months, I'd represented 3 guys at work who were facing dismissal because of alcohol-related incidents. 2 of them, the company were very good and sorted out, or allowed for treatment and gave plenty of time off work and support, which was very good. One of them was summarily dismissed for gross misconduct, and he didn't get his job back. And my own marriage was starting to disintegrate because of my drinking. And after having been at the company for, I can't remember how long at that time, maybe 20 odd years, I got my first warning about my own drinking. So it was a number of things coming together. I went to my GP, my doctor, and about a year before, and said, I think I got a problem drinking, which is a mild understatement. And I tried controlled drinking, and it just didn't work. So all of these things came together. It's just pure logic, If I continued living the way I was living, it was no fun for a start. I was £30,000 plus in debt, mortgage upon mortgage upon mortgage, and my life was miserable. I'd working 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. I'd literally, go to work, come home, sleep, go to work, and punctuated by many visits to off sales, off licenses, pubs, bars. When I worked in London, I would take my overnight tea break at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'd go to Smithfield Market where the pub's open at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'd drink there. But I thought it was quite normal to go for a drink at 5 o'clock in the morning on my tea break. But there were people standing in that pub in suits with briefcases on their way to work, and I thought they were the ones with the problem. But anyway,
David, I really want to actually challenge the premise of your question, which is, I think, founded again in an AA orthodoxy, which is that there is some striking moment that comes out of the blue. And this is where I think people get this idea that, oh, God got me sober, or it was through the grace of God. The Buddhist principle is that everything happens through causes and conditions. In other words, the law of karma. And the thing is that change, big change, often happens suddenly. It appears to happen suddenly, like the Buddha's enlightenment, or like someone getting sober. But if you trace back, you always see that there's a lengthy chain of causality leading up to that moment. And then there's a break in that moment. It's like what's happening with climate change. It's been, a couple hundred years building up, and now there's a break that's happening very suddenly. And so people think, oh, this is sudden. I got sober overnight. God must have done it. And, that's the problem with that idea. I mean, because, okay, it doesn't really matter what you believe, but the problem with that idea is that then that removes agency. And that means that you are not responsible for yourself. And so what if God decides you shouldn't be sober one day? Oh, well, I relapsed. Well, it must have been God's will. It's like, that's the madness of that. I just think it's that this idea really, this idea that we're struck sober or that we're struck enlightened has these repercussions and implications that are really unhelpful in the long run.
So what you're saying is that I got sober when the Big Bang started. That initiated a cause and effect up until the day that I decided to get sober. Is that what you said? It was 1,000 straws that broke the camel's back.
Yes, well, you're venturing into an area where the Buddha says, if you try to actually unravel all the details of karma, your head will explode.
That's happened a couple of times, actually. Doing this show, it certainly has.
Oh, that explains a lot. Yeah.
A big hole in the back of my head here.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So I'm intrigued what you said before, and I'm about your friendship and how you guys have got to know. But do you? And I'm not trying to exclude Vince here, but in AA or in the fellowship in 12-step, we have a certain way of talking to each other, where we talk to each other about issues and deep feelings. In AA, there's that kind of a language, that language of the heart thing, I guess. Do you talk to Vince in the same way as two sober men or two sober individuals?
I think we do. Yeah. I mean, it is one of the beautiful things about recovery that we learn is how to connect with people on this deep level of honesty. But I think that Vince intuitively sort of understood that or developed his understanding of that, because certainly our connection feels very, very much the same. And I will say that sharing the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings, is another kind of fellowship, Sangha, if you will, that makes us very connected. So in a way, the combination of the two is even stronger for me, like than just one, just being with a sober person as opposed to being a sober person who's into Buddhism. So I don't know how you feel about it, Vince.
Vince, do you want to come back with something? I'm just asking you to unmute.
Yeah, having got sober, I had no emotional vocabulary at all. My upbringing was very toxic. My dad was an unwanted child. My mother was practically an unwanted child. They didn't know how to love each other. They didn't know how to love their children. Many years went into my sobriety. I went to hug my dad, and he flinched away. He thought I was going to hit him. Really, really.
Ooh.
So it took me a while to actually develop an emotional vocabulary. And so coming across as I dipped my toe into Buddhism, and then my ankle and my bit of my foot and my bit of my leg, and started to learn more and look at this whole framework that the Buddha lays out in front of us. So much of it is based on the heart, on the heart qualities of kindness, compassion, of joy, and of self-balance, of equanimity. And so many times in his teachings, he keeps coming back to these 4 qualities to be developed again and again and again. Fill your heart, incline your heart with kindness, incline your heart with compassion, incline your heart with joy, incline your heart with equanimity in every single direction. And by that he means, in every area of our life, in public and in private, in our thoughts, in our words, and in our deeds. So that was new to me. My wife at the time, before we got divorced, in early sobriety, she bought me a book by Jack Cornfield, a famous Buddhist teacher, and a few pages into the book, there's a chapter on loving kindness, this quality of befriending, of literally, loving love and kindness. And I read this chapter. And this meditation, and meditation is very simple. You just recite to yourself, may I be safe, may I be well, may I be happy. And it was just revolutionary for me. No one ever told me before that I could love myself. In fact, this isn't telling me that I can. This is telling me that I must love myself. I should love myself. And it said, after a while, you can extend this practice out to your teachers and your benefactors and your good friends and even people that you don't really know. And then you extend it out to your enemies. You send goodwill to your enemies. But it says it's very important. You've got to practice this for yourself for 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years, whatever it takes, before you try to expand it elsewhere. So that was revolutionary for it. Coming from an Irish Catholic background, where loving yourself is a sin, you go to hell. It was quite an eye opener. And these practices, these heart practices, they just get better and better the more you.
Vince, am I right in saying that you did try a 12-step fellowship in the early days? Have you been to AA or NA meetings? And what was it that didn't ring a bell for you?
Okay, at the time I had no support at all. I couldn't get any psychological support, any medical support, clinical support at all. But I did have a copy of the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions that my dad, a recovered alcoholic, through AA, had left me, or had left my wife, and she passed it on to me. And I soaked it up because it's all I had. And I read the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions maybe 3 or 4 times, cover to cover, on my journey to and from work. And then I didn't. I wanted to go to an AA meeting, but there were people I knew were going to an AA meeting, and my own shame and guilt stopped me going.
No.
But eventually it got to the point where I just had to have, after several months, I had to have some support. So I took myself to a town further away where I knew that I wouldn't be known. And I went to 2 meetings there over a couple of weeks. And I could sense that there was this bond, this fellowship there. But there were also aspects of it that I couldn't I couldn't be at peace with. People saying, "Oh, this is my," I do 2 meetings on a Saturday, 2 meetings on a Sunday, and 1 meeting the rest, every day the rest of the week. And I thought, well, that's great, anything that moves us away from suffering, anything that takes a bit of suffering out of our life, that's a skillful means. It might be how I would choose. Might not be how I would choose to do that, but for me it was just swapping one habit for another habit. So it didn't really gel. I really like the idea of step 4. Is that the moral inventory?
Inventory,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah, which I really like that, and I sort of bookmarked that to return to that. And which I have done in a Buddhist sense, because I've now developed a Buddhist inventory to go through past hurts and go through a process of forgiveness, particularly through the lens of some Buddhist qualities. So that really stuck with me. But the program as such, no, it didn't sit well, didn't fit well. And particularly as I was dipping my toe into other things, particularly into the Buddhist path.
Okay, fair enough. Kevin, did you come into your coming into Buddhism? That came after you got sober, or were you Buddhist before?
Well, I don't actually like to call myself a Buddhist.
Okay.
Which I don't mind being an alcoholic, but somehow being a Buddhist seems.
What do we call you, Kevin?
You can call me a Buddhist, but I don't know. But
okay.
No, I practiced Buddhism for quite a few years, for about 5 years before I got sober, which is one of the reasons I know that just being a Buddhist will not get you sober. But I was, like a lot of people that I've encountered, I sort of had these parallel lives, this double life, where on the one hand, I was trying to be a spiritual person. On the other hand, I was trying to stay high all the time, or loaded all the time. And so I thought I was going to fix myself through meditating. And eventually, of course, when I got sober, my perspective changed completely, and I kind of put my Buddhism on the back burner and just focused on the steps and really trying to rebuild my life, because I was a high school dropout and I'd been a musician for many years, but I had no career as such and no relationships of any long standing. And so there was this process of kind of rebuilding my life in sobriety, and then coming back and embracing Buddhism in a much more authentic way, at about 5 years sober, 6 years sober. And that's when I started to try to integrate the two. At first I just kind of did the steps and did the God stuff. And as many of us do, I just kind of put aside my judgments and resistance and just did it because I knew that I needed to do something different. But eventually sort of my own tendencies and understandings and sort of intellect, I guess I would say, kind of came back and wanted to something that made more sense to me, that I could make sense of. And so that became really a lengthy process, another decade really of trying to figure out what it meant to be like a 12-step Buddhist, or whatever. you know, and how to make all that work, and then eventually, you know, writing my first book on that topic. I mean, it seems like one of the what's hanging in the air here is sort of this question of what does it mean? What are we talking about in terms of, you know, bringing Buddhism and recovery together? We can kind of pull out different elements, but I think it's worth talking a little bit as Vince started to talk about what are called the Brahma Viharas: loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. It's one piece. For me, I focus more on the Four Noble Truths, which is maybe a difference in our sort of approaches. But the Four Noble Truths start with the truth of suffering, and then that's the first, and then the second is what causes that suffering, which is fundamentally craving and clinging. So that, to me, those first two noble truths really define addiction and create sort of this parallel idea with the recovery process of like, oh, okay, well, the Buddha's talking about the same thing, right? He's saying that life itself, the problem with being a human, is our addictive qualities. And so then this third and fourth noble truth start to give us a way out. The third noble truth just saying that, well, if what causes suffering is our clinging, then letting go is going to be the way out. And then the fourth noble truth is the way. And that's another list, but the lists are very helpful. The Eightfold Path, which is really, to me, the heart of all this work. And if I talk about the third step, I'd say I'm turning my will and my life over to the care of the Dharma. Well, that to me would be really trying to live according to the Eightfold Path and according to loving kindness, those principles. And that then, coming back to what I said about agency, means that we have agency. We are active in this process. And that, I think, is what really distinguishes the idea of combining Buddhism with recovery from a standard 12-step idea, which I don't think is actually played out in the 12-step world. I mean, people in 12-step recovery are very active and very engaged. You know, they are not passive. When people say they turn their will and their life over to the care of God, they don't sit back then and wait for God to take care of everything. There's a tremendous engagement, but the language of it, and sometimes the things you hear in meetings, oh, God did this for me and all that, sort of sounds like there is an agency. So I don't think they're at the heart of what people do and how they live in recovery is particularly different from just a strict 12-step view and a sort of Buddhist recovery view. But it, you know, on paper, it might look different.
Okay. So I'm going to hand you over to Joe C. in a minute. He's a co-host. Joe's going to ask a question. He's got a beauty for both of you. But I just wanted to clear something up because I've dipped in and out of Buddhism over the years. I can't pretend to know a huge amount about it. But I've been to a lot of meetings in different parts of the world where people profess to be Buddhists, and some people will say that Buddhists don't believe in a God, that God is not part of Buddhism. And then I've heard people say that Buddha gave up talking about God as soon as he became enlightened because there was no point, because he perhaps might create some kind of theology or dogma which would screw everything up. So could you guys just tell me, maybe Vince, do you want to go first and just tell me what your point on that is, where you stand on that, or what you think that's about?
Well, just within Buddhism, everything's impermanent, and you know, the Buddha used gods as teaching aids and angels and devas, but they were seen as impermanent. The gods weren't permanent. There wasn't a creator God. He gives a very lengthy, detailed talk on the creation of the world. And when you look at it on the surface, you think, oh, well, he must know this stuff. But when you look below the surface, he's taking a mickey. He's giving this huge world creation of the world discourse, and he's taking the mickey that, you know, it just is. It's speculative thinking gets you nowhere. So, but in terms of no, there are no permanent gods in Buddhism. You know, there are nice gods and not so nice gods, but they're temporary. And generally, in his talks, they're used as teaching aids to point out, you know, they're brought into the story to ask questions and to point out the Buddha's teachings. Whether he believed in them or not, I don't know.
So what you're saying is that there's no sort of definitive answer, but it's clipping away at all the speculation about what could be or what might be, and it's just getting back to presence or awareness or consciousness. Is that what we're talking about?
He often wouldn't answer questions. He would just remain silent because it was just speculative. They don't get you anywhere. They don't help us right here, right now, dealing with this life. So they're not helpful. Not helpful.
Okay.
I think it's also helpful just to mention that, you know, Vince and I both are kind of follow a particular Buddhist tradition, and sort of to say Buddhism is like saying Christianity, and that you could be a Mormon or you could be a Roman Catholic, you know, and they're not very similar, because, you know, Tibetan Buddhism and Japanese Zen, very different. So we both are more or less followers of Theravadan Buddhism, which claims to be, and has, I think, a legitimate claim to be, sort of the connected to the earliest Buddhist teachings. But there are other forms of Buddhism that might say very different things than we say about Buddhism in general. And certainly I think Vince summed up the God issue well, that sort of that the Buddha doesn't talk about a creator God, and that there are these beings in other planes that appear and show up, and they want to hear the Buddha speak, because even though they are heavenly beings, they are not enlightened. So, yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. I'll let Joe C come in, because I could go on for ages. And just a reminder to everyone, if you've got a question, please send it to me in chat, and I'll forward that on to Vince or Kevin. I'd love to hear what you've got to say. And also, just a bit of a commercial break, just to say that this is a free podcast and free download for everyone, but we do look for some money to keep the podcast going and get it on Zoom. So it's on, if you send it for PayPal, if you've got any spondoolies, send it via PayPal to gilwriter at hotmail.co.uk. That's GILWRITER at hotmail.co.uk. That'd be much appreciated. And also to say that we have a Facebook page that we'd love you to join, where you can find out we've got some exciting guests, some more exciting guests coming up over the next couple of weeks. And also that we're on YouTube. So go to our YouTube channel and you'll find loads of all the videos from this past season, which have just, some of it's been extraordinary. So, but with that advert over, Joe C, you've got a good question. Come in, mate. Yeah, you're unmuting.
Great. Thanks, gentlemen. Kevin, I'm quite familiar with your work. Great to see you. And Vince, it was just wonderful to hear from you. I think the great combination here is the 12-step versus alternate approach. I mean, 12-steppers look at the whole world through that eyes. Oh, how is Dharma recovery like the 12 steps? Or how is harm reduction like the 12 steps? And so this is great. This is fantastic. I want to talk about the idea, and it's a reductionist simplification, but it's very popular, that the opposite of addiction isn't recovery, it's connection. Mm-hmm. But in Buddhism, there is, an adherence to solitude, where some Buddhist practitioners strip away all material and social connection, sexual activity, and all that sort of thing. So are they unconnected, or are they just connected with all sentient beings in the whole world in a different way? Would you refute that the opposite of addiction is connection, or would you just explain it in a more Buddhist-y kind of way than social psychologists do?
I've heard that that take, and I haven't thought about it, so I don't have anything to say. I think about it. I might have something to say about it. But I think your fundamental question is based on sort of a simplistic idea about Buddhism, which I've shared. So I understand the tendency, and maybe you're just sort of being a devil's advocate in a way that because I certainly felt that way when I started to practice. It's like being alone, being separate. But that's not at all the Buddhist path. First of all, the three, components, the three refuges or three jewels in Buddhism are the Buddha, the teacher, the Dharma, the teaching, and the Sangha, the community. So it's 1/3 of that. And famously, the Buddha said, that noble friends and noble conversation are the whole of the holy life. So there are many places we can find in the teachings that point to the importance of community. The Buddha went off for a period of time, as people do, to develop, for the practice of meditation and to do the inner work. But before he went, he was with a group. And after he had his breakthrough, he went back to that group and continued and built a community. In the Theravadan tradition, the monastics are not allowed to raise food or keep food. They are, by definition, connected to not just each other, but the community at large, because they depend upon the community to feed them. And that's something that the Buddha built into that monastic tradition so that they would not become hermetic in their lifestyle and become detached. I'm sure Vince has some words on this idea, if I didn't take up all the good stuff.
No, thank you for that, Kevin. The opposite of addiction being connection. Connection is a huge part of living, a huge part of life. But when I was drinking, I had a sangha in my local pub.
Right.
We were our own fellowship, and one of the things about stopping drinking was that fellowship then fell apart.
Mm-hmm.
And quite rightly, trying to hold on to that would have been unworkable. And I'm so glad that I left all of that behind. So from a point of view of community, of fellowship, or from a Buddhist perspective of Sangha, it's hugely important to connect with people, to feel connected, to be part of something. In terms of what the opposite to addiction might be, I don't know. From a Buddhist point of view, we're all addicted. We're addicted to craving what we crave. We're addicted to what we're averse to, and we're particularly addicted to delusions and confusion. And so one might say that the opposite of addiction then would be not to be confused,
right,
and not to be averse, and not to crave things to be different. But that's getting a bit technical, Joe. Sorry.
Well, non-clinging, right? Non-clinging would be sort of the Buddhist definition of the opposite of addiction, because addiction is clinging and non. So we keep it pretty simple.
I think it's like what we're saying here is that every human being is addicted to something at some level. We're addicted to whatever this reality is. We're addicted to some form of demand, of desire. We're all desiring something. Is that what we're trying to say here?
Right. Ajahn Sumedho says we live in a desire realm, which kind of just sums it all up. That's the world we live in.
And I just wanted to go back, actually. Sorry, Joe, have you got anything else you want to go on?
Oh, no, I'm good. I'm sure everyone has lots of good questions here.
So keep those questions coming. I think Tom Equanimous says, as just a statement, that he finds a lot of Buddhism in the AA program: letting go, the third step, acceptance, ego reduction, deflation, non-self, even grace. It seems the bondage of self identifies with non-self. Thank you very much, Tom.
Right on.
So, yeah. So get some questions in, but I just wanted to go back. You just said about we live in that realm, and just talk about what Vince said. Vince said something about beings in other realms. What do you mean by that? And who are they?
It was Kevin who said that, but I
No, it wasn't. Come on, what do you mean?
Okay. Well, certainly from a Buddhist cosmology or Buddhist mythology point of view, you know, and certainly in the time of the Buddha, there was a common belief that when you died, you'd be reborn somewhere else, a heaven realm or a hell realm. But all things being impermanent, you never stayed there. You did your time in that particular realm, be it a heaven realm or a hell realm, and once you've done your time there, once your good karma or bad karma had worn out, then you'd be reborn again into a different realm, and the cycle went on and on and on. And this was all part of the Buddha's teachings about stopping that cycle. And traditionally, those realms, there were 2 heaven realms and 3 hell realms. In later traditions, they increased that to 3 heaven realms, and you know, the heaven realm is just the realm of the gods, of the shining ones, the devas. The other heaven realm is the realm of human beings. You know, we don't appreciate what we've got. So 2 heaven realms, and then 3 hell realms. The hell realm, the hot and cold hell realm, where you get tortured. And the animal hell realm, where you just get by and your instincts, you know, you just survive, you're constantly on the lookout. And the last hell realm is the realm of the hungry ghosts, the shades, the hungry shades, where you know, one description in the scriptures says, you know, everything you touch turns to shit, and your cravings cannot be satisfied. And I can't think of a better description of rock bottom than that at all. That's what happened to me. You know, my life started to turn to shit, and my cravings couldn't be met. But from my point of view, you know, these are just psychological mind states that we move through, literally moment to moment. I can move from a heavenly mind state to a hellish mind state instantly. At the end I give 5-day hungry ghost retreats, and we go into a lot of detail around forgiveness and loving kindness practices, and I give out a feedback form. And at the end of the retreat, I might pick up a feedback form, and it says, Vince, you know, best teacher ever. You've changed my life. You know, I'm going to tell all my friends about you. And I'm up in the heaven realms. I'm one of the gods. I'm one of the devas. And I might pick up the next feedback form, and he might say, dear Mr. Cullen, you've just wasted 5 days of my life. And instantly, I'm in the hell realms. Yeah. You know, I don't need anyone to torture me. I'm quite good at self-torturing myself. But I can move from those mind states instantly. And this is happening moment to moment. Every point of contact, every sight, every sound, every smell, every taste is an opportunity to move between those realms. So just seeing that, I find that very, very helpful. I try to keep myself in the human realm as much as possible. Yeah. And can I just add to that? I've never had a feedback form that said I wasted some 5 days of anyone's life.
You haven't? Wow, you're so lucky.
Imagine what it's like being a Scotland football fan tonight, eh?
I did get one feedback form that said, this retreat wasn't for me, but I learned so much.
Interesting.
Well, that's nice, isn't it? It's being nice.
But this is just to say, what Vince is describing. When you ask me why I don't say I'm a Buddhist, or maybe you didn't quite ask me, but a Buddhist says reincarnation is real and that those realms are real. People like Vince and I tend to psychologize these teachings, and Mark Epstein's book Thoughts Without a Thinker does a great job of taking those realms and showing them as psychological states. But I think it's interesting, because we, in our sort of scientific materialism, we can't accept the idea that there really are other realms of existence, and I don't know, but I agree with
That's
Vince. We can experience them all right here and now. So that's what's relevant for our lives.
and just the analogy, I guess, is that some people would say use the Bible, take the Bible literally, and some would take it as a fable or symbolic sort of stories as to the state of mind.
Fair. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So, question from our beloved Donal, who's also in Ireland, by the way, Vince. And Donal asked the following question to Vince: did you believe your dad was a recovered alcoholic, or could you relate to him as a recovering alcoholic? The 12 and 12 was not an AA big book, was not the AA big book, and was not necessarily the AA program per se, whereas the AA experience was not so much a belief, but an experience of the God energy.
Can you just repeat the last sentence? Sorry, David.
The AA experience was not so much a belief, but an experience of the God energy.
I mean, I can't speak for my dad. My dad suffered from mental health issues all of his life, apart from addictions, and a lot of it stemming from childhood trauma and what have you. And he was in and out of mental institutions. I would go home regularly, on a Friday night or a Saturday night, and there'd be an ambulance outside my house when my dad had tried to kill himself yet again, and it was so traumatizing for myself and my siblings to see this. So he tried he never saw drink as a problem. Being an Irishman, the drink wasn't the problem. That the drink was the cure. But his mental health issues got worse and worse, and he had electric shock treatment and experimental drugs. But eventually, in his late 50s, 60s, just as I was having my first son, he finally got sober. It worked for him, and he embraced AA fully. He used to man the AA helpline one night a week, and I think it was just that he had a spare copy of the 12 and 12 that he gave to my ex-wife while I was still drinking, and it was when I stopped drinking, it was the only thing that I had to literally to hand that helped enormously. So don't know. I can't say. Certainly, my dad was a church-going person, but a lot of this was based on fear, and a lot of my family in Ireland, is based on fear, and this idea that I'm going to go to hell is. I don't find it particularly helpful. Right. It's not. I've got no interest in past lives. I've got no interest in future lives. This is my one and only life, and that's why every breath is so important. But my dad was a church-going person, and he did service with AA for years. In the end, he dropped the service. He dropped going to meetings, but he was quite comfortable with that.
Okay, I think also Donal might also be referring to that maybe the big book might have been a better place to start than just the 12 by 12. But
maybe it would have been. Yeah. And there we go to court.
Yeah, that's not my opinion, but I think I know what Donal's saying there. So I'm going to hand you over again to another co-panelist, Michael Stacey. You got a question for Kevin, I think.
Yeah, Kevin. Hello. We're going back to the idea about the addiction. And would you be willing to say that like maybe there's a primary addiction that could be to suffering?
That there's a primary addiction
yeah.
You mean that sort of underlying sort of that like before we actually have alcohol or anything else, that there's a
Exactly, that the primary addiction is to the suffering.
Well, I think that I'm not sure that I'll say two things. One is that it's not the object of addiction that's a problem. It's the tendency. Okay. It's the tendency of clinging, right? It's the tendency to be addicted. That's the primary sort of underlying quality that we have to deal with, and then that quality of of clinging and grasping and craving attaches to different objects, some of which are material and some of which are immaterial. You know, from a Buddhist view, kind of the deepest underlying addiction is the addiction to self, which as was brought up earlier is, and I think in one of the questions or comments, is exactly what not exactly, but very similar to what the 12-step literature says, you know, that our problem was self, and that, and I would say that the 11th tradition, or the 12th tradition, sorry, the 11th tradition I'm not so interested in. The 12th tradition, saying that anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, is pointing to that as well, that anonymity is letting go of identity, letting go of clinging to a self. And so, you know, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities. So putting the Dharma before self, putting spirituality before, you know, our individuality. So yeah, I think I answered the question.
You did very much so. Thank you so much. And then I had one other question: is do you have a relationship with Noah Levine, the writer of the Refuge Recovery book, and the recovery based on that book?
I do not currently have a relationship with Noah. At one time we were good friends, and over time that relationship frayed, and sadly, you know, his you know, position in the community really, well, if you know the story, I'm guessing you're asking because you know something about it. You know, he was accused of sexual misconduct, and that's been a very troubling issue. But I don't have any contact with him anymore. Not so much by my choice. So.
Okay. Let's move along from there. So, Donald in Winnipeg has just sent this, and it's really lovely. It's this is a quote taken from the Akron pamphlet, Spiritual Milestones and Alcoholics Anonymous, edited by none other than Dr. Bob, the co-founder of AA. And it goes, consider the eightfold program laid down in Buddhism: right view, right aim, right speech, right action, right living, right effort, right mindedness, and right contemplation. The Buddhist philosophy, as exemplified by these 8 points, could be literally adopted by AA as a substitute and or addition to the 12 steps. Generosity, universal love, and welfare of others, rather than considerations of self, are basic to Buddhism. Wow.
It's a really striking document. I learned of that some years ago and was somewhat stunned, because there are those who claim that Dr. Bob was a strict born-again Christian and believed that you had to take Jesus Christ as your savior in order to get sober. That's been written by some people. And there you have something more than contradicting that. Yeah, it shocked me when I read that. I was amazed that Dr. Bob even knew what the Eightfold Path was. You know, that's like, wow. Okay.
That is quite stunning, actually. I've never seen that. That's thank you very much. I'll put that in chat, and
you can get a hold of those just by, that's Akron, Ohio, which is, of course, where Dr. Bob and Bill W. met for the first time.
Sure.
And I've actually visited that group. I've been to Dr. Bob's, or no, Bill's, was it Bill's house? I don't know. I think it was Dr. Bob's house. Anyway, they you can write to them and they'll send you those pamphlets for like $5 or something. You know.
Wow.
It's very cool.
Thank you. This is a really good question. I think it's from Tom Equanonymous, and this is actually a really good question. What do you think of famous teachers like Chogyam Trungpa and Alan Watts, who were active raging alcoholics? I've heard Alan Watts mentioned in meetings and stuff, which always makes me chuckle. But what's your take on that? Kevin? Is that literally
I
a case
think
of drunk Buddhists?
I'll just say that it goes back to what I said earlier. Buddhism is not a recovery program.
Yeah, sure.
It's quite possible to be an alcoholic Buddhist.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thank you very much. Vince, did you want to come in now? I know Vince is having a little bit of trouble with his audio, but I'm asking him to unmute. There you go, man.
Yeah. Going back to my early months and first year of sobriety, and apart from the Jack Cornfield book, Apart from with Heart, that my wife at the time bought me, she also bought me a basic Buddhism 101 book, and even a couple of pages into that book there were these 5 suggestions that the Buddha apparently offers, to what might be considered, the very earliest harm reduction program. And he offers 5 suggestions for taking suffering out of your life. And first suggestion is, don't harm anyone. It's simple. Second suggestion is don't take anything that doesn't belong to you. The third suggestion is, be sexually responsible. The fourth suggestion is, tell the truth and speak kindly. And the fifth suggestion is, don't take intoxicants. Now, these 5 suggestions, it's got me thinking. These weren't the 10 commandments. These are just, someone saying that if you live in harmony with these suggestions, an awful lot of suffering just drops away from your life. So it really resonated with me, and the fact that they weren't commandments, they weren't rules, they were suggestions. And much later, when I started reading these early texts myself, and there's one particular text where the Buddha introduces these 5 ideas. And when he introduces them, he says, these are ancient, these are traditional, these are unadulterated from beginning. They can't be argued with. Sensible people, cannot argue with these suggestions. So he's already saying that they're ancient and traditional 2,500 years ago. So these are universal qualities. These aren't Buddhist precepts. These are universal precepts for how we can live in harmony with ourselves and with the rest of the world, our communities. So Buddhist teachers that take that 5th suggestion and say, well, that doesn't apply to me. Well, it doesn't apply to them. That's Okay. I don't know that I'd want to follow someone who turns up an hour late and stumbles on stage with a bottle of sake. Where's the enlightenment there? Can he change a baby's nappy? Can he drive a car? No. There's everyday enlightenment, is it? I tried the being drunk, 24 hours a day, and that didn't get me anywhere. In fact, one of the perhaps the final camel straw we were talking about earlier about what all the things that came together that night to make me pour that last beer was the fact I just started driving. And the night before, at work during my lunch break, I drank 8 pints of beer, and I drove home in the morning, knowing that I was probably over the legal driving limit. And that's just one more thing that said, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to kill myself. I don't want to kill anyone else. That was one of those many things that came together that said, no, last beer, and that's going to be it. Okay. And I haven't mentioned it yet, but in those first 2 years were miserable, really, really miserable, because I was abstaining from doing something I thought I wanted to do. But then I got to go to Thailand and to this famous detox monastery in Thailand where they take a herbal medicine and they vomit for 5 days, and there's herbal teas and herbal steam baths. And I was speaking to the abbot, or through an interpreter to the abbot, and he said, I asked him, can I take the medicine to stop smoking? And he said, yeah. He said, you have one shot glass of this medicine, but you must take a vow. And a vow? He said, well, yeah, that's not what we offer here. The herbal medicine, the herbal steam bath, the herbal tea, the chanting in the evening, the teaching, that's 5% of what we offer. He said the other 95% of what we offer is a vow, is a promise not to take intoxicants. And that's when the penny dropped. That's what I did 2 years earlier at my kitchen table. When I poured that glass of lager out and made a promise to myself, is exactly the same as what the monastery in Thailand were doing for their clientele, for their patients. So, this herbal vomiting treatment is very real, very fast, very efficacious. I try to go back every year, and I take the medicine myself on a regular basis. But this difference between the abbot sort of made the point, it's not about abstinence, it's about abandoning your old life. And when I made that distinction, well, I was trying to be abstinent, trying to stop myself doing something I thought I wanted to do, keeping me a prisoner in the past. If I abandon that old way of life and to adopt a new way of life, which is very much about letting go and renunciation, and everything is just much easier. There's no looking back, no regrets, no why can't I drink normal anymore? Because I don't drink now because I follow the Dharma. I don't drink now because I want to live in harmony with these suggestions. I don't drink now because I want to live a peaceful life, peace of heart, peace of mind. Does that make sense?
Yes, that sounds strangely familiar to I'm sure to a lot of people here as well, whether you're in 12-step fellowship or not. We do take a vow of some, and I certainly did. Just a couple of questions on that. What's the tea made of? What's the ingredients of that herbal remedy?
There's 109 secret herbs and bits of bark and what have you.
Like KFC.
A closely guarded secret. But I take the medicine every time I go. Try to go once a year or a bit more if possible. And while I'm there, I take the medicine after chanting. Some of the senior monks take the medicine. It's almost sociably.
It's not
I can assure you,
is it psychotropic? Is it some sort of? It's not mushrooms or anything like that. It's
no. It certainly leaves you feeling cleansed. And I can assure you there are different vintages of this stuff. It tastes dreadful, and just to hold it down for a little while is a miracle.
Yeah, it's not like some kind of ayahuasca, is it, or anything? It's not psychedelic or anything like that. No? Just an expunger.
It just cleanses. Yeah, very cleansing.
Oh, okay. Sounds intriguing. And just on we've used the word Dharma. When we say Dharma, what are we talking about? Kevin?
I'll let Kevin.
Well, in the more general meaning of Dharma is truth or natural law. Usually when Buddhists talk about Dharma, they're talking about the teachings of the Buddha. And so it's very broad in its meaning. It contains a lot. It's just shorthand for, something that covers everything from the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path to, factors of awakening and the foundations of mindfulness. It's this vast teaching.
Okay. So it's a transmission of the teaching, the transmission of the wisdom or the...
Yeah.
Yeah, from Buddha. Okay, from
Yep.
Buddha.
But it also has the sense of being, just natural, basic pattern of things.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's how things really are.
The Buddhist teachings. The Buddhist teachings aren't a revelation. He's not discovering something. He's just reminding you. You sort of.
Sure. I guess the $1 million question as well we do ask a lot of our guests on here, and some people claim it and some people don't. What is enlightenment, and are any of you enlightened? Are you two enlightened? What does that mean? I'm being devil's advocate there for sure, but can you tell me what enlightenment means, and if you've experienced it? Vince, you go first.
Silence.
Yeah.
Well, my understanding of enlightenment is simply the absence of craving, the absence of aversion, and the absence of confusion. And that's it. Now, I can experience moments where I have no preferences, I have no aversions, and I think I'm fairly clear-headed. Mm-hmm. But it's putting those moments together to make longer and longer and longer moments. So for me, very much a very, very simple approach to waking up. It's the word nirvana is the word used in Sanskrit, and nibbana is the word used in Pali, but they're action words. They're not places you get to. They're things that you do. You're waking up. So no, I'm not an enlightened being.
Okay, so but what are we waking up to? What does that mean? We're waking up to what? From what are we waking up from?
Right, okay, so we're waking up to the basic pattern of things. We're waking up to the Dharma. We're waking up to the way things really are. For example, my whole world is a construction. My emotions are constructions. My So where I create my own world, and whether I create a world that's full of love and joy and balance is up to me. And then this is basic neuroscience nowadays. The Buddha was saying this 2,500 years ago. What your mind frequently thinks and ponders becomes the inclination of your mind. And if you frequently think and ponder, craving and cruelty and ill will, that's where your mind's going to be. That's where you're going to live. But if you frequently think and ponder, kindness and generosity and letting go, then that's the world you're going to live in. And he referred to these worlds as our personal worlds. You create your own world. Some of us are old enough to remember the Japanese TV series Magic Monkey.
Yes, I saw you with your T-shirt.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. And the opening line to that program was it's a misquote, but it's still a Buddhist quote about with our thoughts we create the world.
Yes.
Now this is basic neuroscience stuff. There's an Australian professor, I can't think of his name, and he says, not only you are what you eat, but you are what you think. Mm-hmm. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic Roman emperor, he said something along the lines of, watch your thoughts, because your thoughts colour your soul. And this is the same idea, that we create our world with our thoughts. And from a neuroscience point of view, that's absolutely right. The right brain takes in what it can do: sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. And the left brain tries to make up a story about it. And sometimes he gets the story fairly right, and a lot of the time he gets the story wrong. I live by my narratives and stories. So just this seeing the world as it really is, from a neuroscience point of view, from evolutionary psychology point of view, from a modern psychology point of view, from a natural selection point of view, for me, that's investigating the Dharma. That's seeing things for how they really are. And that's why I can say, I can only be happy here and now, right here and now, because to postpone my happiness of some other place, some other time, some other experience, it's never going to happen.
Kevin, I don't know if you're on the same track on that, but I wanted to extend that. So, is that the reality? Is that the reality? Is that the objective reality? Is what we see? Taking away all the emotion, taking away all that colouring. Is this the reality? Is this the real? Is this the truth that we're seeing, or are we in a realm, as you said before? Are we in some sort of dimension? And I don't know what your take on that might be.
So are we in the Matrix? Is kind of
yes.
If we are, we don't know. So
it's speculation. Okay,
but I agree with everything Vince said, and I'll just add a few things just for people's own reflection. First of all, Jack Kornfield has a great essay called Enlightenments, plural, and he describes a variety of different ways of thinking about enlightenment. Kind of what there's like the Dalai Lama is like an expression of compassion and enlightenment, and Thich Nhat Hanh is like the mindfulness enlightenment, and he describes how in the different Buddhist traditions, just as I was talking about, there's these different views of what it means. In the Theravada tradition, there's a very specific like 4-stage process, and all of that becomes very sort of mechanical in a way, and doesn't, I think, point to the meaning or the experience. I think it's something everybody has to investigate for themselves. Buddhadasa Bhikkhu has a great teaching called Natural Nirvana, which is really about, just as Vince was saying, just sort of momentary experiences of letting go, and that those are like little nirvana, like you're having a moment of enlightenment, which, because if the cause of suffering is clinging and the end of suffering is letting go, then any moment of letting go is a kind of a moment of waking up or a moment of enlightenment. I think we just look at it as too much in a typical Western way of something we want to acquire. And it's the opposite of anything you can acquire. So it really becomes a problem in our minds how to think about it. Because if it's something we want to get, but you can't get it, then your head explodes. You know, it's kind of like, what? How can I get something that you can't get? So, but the literal translation of the word nirvana or nibbana is a fire that has gone out. So that's one of the literal translations. And so if you can think of, you know, if your ego has stopped burning or your self has stopped burning, what does that look like? What's a fire that's gone out? It's very hard to can't quite get a hold of that.
I'm getting that. Okay, so there's one more question for me before I ask, so two more questions. And I don't think it's a redundant question because I'm not sure we've entirely tapped on it, but I think, what is consciousness? What is consciousness? What do you think that is? Anyone want to have a go at that? No, Vince, Kevin's given up.
I'm no good on that. I'm no good at that. Maybe Vince has something with that.
I don't get much post here. no one talking. But this week, I checked the post box and there's actually a package in there from Amazon, something I hadn't ordered. And I opened it up and it was a book called Consciousness. And where's this come from? And I took a guess and I my eldest son and said, is this from you? He said, yes, it is. He said, I just read it. I found it very useful. So I've picked up this lovely little book on consciousness, which basically says we don't know. We don't know why consciousness arises, but it very much summarizes it as simply as the consciousness is about conscious of this present moment experience. Me, he's sitting here now talking to you. It does posit that there's no free will, in the sense of my unconscious brain makes up its mind before it lets me know. so right. I think I'm making a choice, but my unconscious brain's already made the choice for me. And it does. The brain does wonderful things. It brings all these sights, sounds, and smells into synchronicity, so they all appear to happen at the same time when they don't happen at the same time. I see things quicker than I hear them, or then I smell them, or I feel them. They all arrive at different times. And the brain says, oh, hold on a minute, I'll just delay that one, and present them all in one go, as if they're all happening at the same time. So the brain's a wonderful thing. And I must go on to the split brain experiments. People who have had their brains split for epileptic reasons, they've got two brains and they have 2 points of view. The left brain can be a conservative and the right brain can be a liberal. That's holding 2 points of view at the same time. So the brain's wonderful. So where consciousness comes from, God only knows. How far it extends, because it's posited that it goes beyond animate beings to inanimate beings. So, but I think the jury's still out on that one. But from my perspective, consciousness, certainly in terms of Buddhist consciousness as well, is just my awareness of this present moment experience.
So is that enlightenment? Like you said?
No. And of course, most of the time we're not conscious. We ignore what's happening around us. So developing a mindful consciousness of right now this is happening. Right now, this is ill will. Right now, this is kindness. Right now, I'm feeling anxious. Developing that level of awareness, that level of being conscious, is on the path towards towards awakening. Yes, so I would say.
Okay, Kevin.
You can call me Kev. Don't mind that.
Hi, Kev.
You know, it's. I think what's important to me is there something I'm going to learn from this that's going to help me, rather than, one of the problems with Buddhism is that it attracts intellectuals, and intellectuals like to spend a lot of time thinking about things, but in a sense they're not really solving anything. And so the question is, what value can I derive from exploring the question of consciousness? And the place that it shows up in the Buddhist teachings is in called the five aggregates, in which it says that consciousness only arises with sense contact. So, and that that this whole experience of consciousness, contact, form, feeling, perception, that it creates the illusion of a self. And so the question of consciousness, the value of exploring consciousness, is seeing how you create identity around being conscious. There is a self because I'm aware, I am conscious, so I must be here. And so that story becomes then a creation that causes suffering. So if I can see through consciousness and see it as just an object rather than an aspect of my identity, then that's theoretically a way to become free from attachment. But I don't know what I just said, so
I'm going to listen back.
I think I just made it up, but it sounded confusing enough that it might sound like I know something.
It certainly impressed me, but yeah. I think we're well over time now. Thank you very much for both of you. So the final question is, as we do with everyone on the show, so it's a double whammy, and both of you have worked together. You've written a book together. Imagine this: 5 years time, you've written a book together. It's been a smashing success. You've sold millions of copies, and all of a sudden, you've found yourselves billionaires. How about that? And it's just amazing. And you've decided to build your own a super yacht, where both of you, obviously because you argue all the time and you have different opinions. So one lives on one end of the yacht, the other lives on the other end of the yacht, and you sail off the coast together, off the coast of America. You go down into the Pacific, and then somewhere off the coast of Fiji, you hit a submerged reef. And unfortunately, super yacht starts to sink very rapidly. And both of you, all you've got time, either of you, is to grab a plastic bag, go to your bookshelf and grab your favorite book, chuck it in the bag. Both of you dive overboard, swim to a deserted island through shark-infested waters, wash up on the beach and await rescue. And each of you have got a book to read. And maybe after a few weeks, you might swap books. Who knows? But can you tell me what the book is? What's your favorite book? Who's it by and why? And let's go with you first, Kevin.
So the Majjhima Nikaya, which is the middle-length discourses of the Buddha, translated by Bhikkhu Bodhi and Bhikkhu Nyanamoli.
Okay, we'll have to write that down and put that in chat. Can you say that slowly? Can you just say it slowly for the podcast?
I'll type it in for you.
Can you say it slowly as well?
The middle-length discourses of the Buddha.
Okay. And who's it by?
Well, it's by the Buddha, but it's translated by Bhikkhu Bodhi. I'm going to type that in because that's
great.
Funny spelling. And
okay.
Oops, and actually and Bhikkhu Nyanamoli.
Wow, good name. Middle-length discourses of the Buddha by Bhikkhu Bodhi. That's Bhikkhu, capital Bodhi, and Bhikkhu, Bhikkhu, Nanamoli. And why that particular book? Is it you like the translation, or you like what's in it?
It's just the most comprehensive Buddhist teachings that you can get in one book, I would say.
Okay. Thank you very much. Vince, over to you.
Dave, I don't know. I probably would. I'd probably drowned because I wouldn't be able to make my mind up.
Oh, that's the best answer we've ever had.
I assumed you were going to.
It doesn't have to be a spiritual book. It could be like Dick and Jane Go to the Farm. You know what I mean? Or whatever you want.
Oh yeah. I was thinking of Jonathan Livingston Seagull, but
oh, good choice.
But don't you want something you can read over and over? That's the whole idea to me.
Yeah.
But I would stand in front of the bookshelf and go down with the ship.
Yeah. And certainly, James Cameron will make a film of it in 20 years' time. You know, of going down to find your body there, this skeleton in front of a bookcase, sort of drifting amongst the coral and the seaweed. Yeah.
See, I wouldn't be on a yacht though. See, I would have built a golf course with my money. So that's. Oh. I want my own private golf course, you know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll see what we can do. Okay. Thank you very much to both of you. Thank you so much, Vince. Thank you so much, Kevin, for coming along here. This has been a really entertaining episode. And just to say to everyone, we're going to be back next week. We have none other than Neil Donald Walsh, who's the author of Conversations with God. He's a controversial figure, and he's going to be along next week. So please come along at the same time. And with that, I'm going to end recording. You guys, we're going to hang around for 5-10 minutes to answer a few questions from the audience. But with that, I'm going to end recording now. Thank you very much. See you next week. And